I went to Parsons School of Design, and once I graduated, I started to look for any kind of illustration work I could get, which at the time was, tiny black and white spots for things like computer magazines and things like that. Anything I could get to be in print. My goal was to do editorial illustration, which at the time, and I'm talking about I graduated in 1980 from Parsons. At the time, editorial work, it was a really healthy field. It was a fantastic time for that. And I loved editorial illustration because it was basically problem solving. Every assignment was, you might have an article that is business related, and you have to find a way to make that interesting. And for me, the way to make it visually interesting was to use metaphor or to use fairy tales, mythological imagery, stuff that I really like to draw. And so I built my editorial career on that, and I did that for, I guess, I was doing that for about 14 or 15 years. And then I did a little bit of book illustration and illustrated a book called Finn McCool, which was both a book, kind of a children's book, but primarily it was a video, kind of an animatic. And they'd hire a famous actor to narrate this story, this Irish folktale about a giant, and they would move the camera across still illustrations. So I did about 150 watercolor drawings for this thing. But it was right up my alley because it was kind of old school fairy tale kind of thing. It drew on that kind of work that I really loved. And it was also really character based, as most of my work is, and always has been. But based on that, a fellow named Roy Conley called me from Disney and asked whether I wanted to contribute designs to The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I gladly did, and didn't really make much of an effect on that particular movie. But ever since, I've had my hand in one film or another. It's been, sort of a constant stream of work in character design, in film. But was that a plan? It wasn't. It happened. And I think my entire career has kind of just happened. And it was just a matter of me kind of going with the flow and making some choices. The stream would split. I'd have to decide which way to go. But the choices were usually pretty evident. I tried to not be afraid to take some chances. I discovered pretty early on that the only way I was going to be happy as an illustrator was to find a way to solve the assignments in a way that was fun for me. So when even with the driest article for a business magazine, I had to try to find a way to twist it into something that I was going to really enjoy drawing. Some kind of metaphor, something other than a businessman behind a desk at a computer. I drew thousands of them, and finally I just had to start solving the problems in a different way. And by doing that, and by kind of twisting things to my own needs, I was better able to find my voice as an illustrator. And if there is something unique I bring to my work, it's a perspective that's personal. It's stuff I want to draw, and I think that's the secret. I draw the kind of things that make me happy. it's yeah, to say, oh, I just draw what I want, is not exactly the whole story, because you still have to solve the problem. You can't just do it your way. Um, you know, the art director is going to have you're going to have to fulfill certain needs for that piece. But the trick is finding a way to do it that is true to your own voice, to your own perspective. Otherwise, really, if you're just being hired for your hand, if it's just for the way you render, that's really only half the story. I mean, for me, it was. I always felt like I was being hired for both my hand and my point of view, my own sense of humor. It's always, for me, it's always point of view. I mean, it seems to me, I think that all the people, all the artists I've admired, the people whose work I pin up to my wall, they're unique. They stand out, and it's because of what they bring to it. Whatever it is that made them want to draw pictures or tell stories, it's unique to them. You can tell when somebody is aping somebody else. They might look like that artist, but they don't have whatever it is that made that first artist start to make those kind of drawings. You know what I mean? So, point of view will always trump intellect, as you put it. For me, if I'm drawing a picture that makes me laugh, that is particular to my own sense of humor. I don't know. I think that's just the formula for what makes individual artists. It's your unique experience. It's the stuff. I was having this conversation with my friend this morning. It's the stuff that stuck to you along the way. There were certain things that really appealed to me when I was a kid. I loved. I wanted to act in monster movies. My heroes were people like. I mean, what a weird way to grow up. But I loved Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney. I loved those movies. I love the imagery. I used to draw that stuff. And then when I got into comics, it was kind of an offshoot of that. I liked superhero stuff, but I really dug the gothic horror and that kind of thing. And that work was derived from, an older history of illustration, stuff that was not contemporary and that I started to discover. And that work, like the work of artists of the turn of the century, the early part of the 20th century, really informed who I became, the kind of artist I became. But I don't know, that path was my own. And it wasn't preconceived. It wasn't planned. It was just how I ended up. It's the stuff that stuck to me. And I think it's important to try to find that, to try to find out who you are as an artist. Because to be happy in this business, you really have to love it, because it's hard. It can be hard. But if these are challenges, the kind of challenges you enjoy, then you'll be happy as an artist. But if you're a stylist, if you've got no emotional investment in it, it's going to be a hard road. No, but that's a really interesting point about the people in this business. They never seem to grow up. I mean, when you visit an animation studio, everybody's got their own cubicle or office, and it's filled with toys. It's filled with drawings and toys, and there's a joy there. They bring this stuff with them. They surround themselves by the things that make them happy and that inspire them. And I don't know. Animation studios seem to me they're just filled with kids, really excited, talented, smart, funny kids. When I'm designing a character, I really am trying to inhabit that character, and that's my work is character based, whether in illustration or in animation, it's always been about who's living there in these pictures and what's going on in that story. What's going on behind the eyes of the character. For me, character design is not just depicting what a character looks like. It's who that character is. It's not just the costume. It's not just the expression. It's what's going on behind the eyes, and I try to imbue them with something, a little deeper. I want you to know what that character is thinking, and for hopefully for you to get a sense that there's something, there's some nuance there. Who that character is. If it's a villain, why is it a villain? What kind of a villain is it? It's if it's just furrowed brows and a grimace, it's not enough. Really, the most interesting villains are the ones that have a genuine beef. They're crazy, but there's a reason they are the way they are. It's not just because they want to destroy things. It's because they're pissed off about something, some perceived injustice or whatever. And you want to, even with the most horrible characters, I don't know, I try to get some kind of humanity in there if I can. And it doesn't, it's not always successful, but you just want to know more than what that character looks like. There should be nothing arbitrary about what you're including in an illustration or in a character design. Every element should be helping to tell the story of that character. And I've often told this story about looking through this giant Rockwell book. I was looking for a particular pair of shoes. I'm not sure what it was, but it was the style of a character from a certain point in history. So I've got this great big Rockwell book, and I'm going through the pages, but I'm only looking down, not looking at the pictures. I'm only looking down at the feet of all the characters. And picture after picture, I realize the character is reflected in all the footwear. There's not one arbitrary choice made about what that character is wearing. If it's a football player, it's a kind of cleats. If it's a Dickensian character, it's a genuine leathery, maybe worn out shoe from that period, and on and on. There's so much character in these shoes, and the shoes help tell the story of who the whole character is. So if you can, you try to get that stuff right, because it's going to help tell you a fuller story of who the character is. And I wish I were better at costume. It's not one of my strong points. It's something I have to work at. It doesn't come naturally to me, but it's really important. First of all, that took place at a beer place 2 blocks away from me. I mean, I live there, and I wanted to get that right. I studied for a while. I was making notes, walking down the street or going to have a beer or coffee in these places, and there's a certain language, visual language, that you can get wrong if you fake it. So I appreciate the fact that worked for you. That one was one I took seriously. But I'm constantly observing, I grew up. I mentioned the things that stuck to me when I was a kid. One of the other things was I had a passion for animals. I was obsessed with animals, and I had a lot of them. I had snakes and hamsters and parrots and God knows what else, and frogs and toads. Not all at the same time, but I always had something. And I worked in a pet shop for like, I guess 2 or 3 years, a couple of years. I was obsessed with them. And I think, you know, it's a little chicken and the egg. I don't know what, you know, what made that happen, whether I came to the table with this kind of love of animals, but I've always had it. And I've always drawn them. And yeah, any excuse I get to draw them, you know, back to the editorial assignments. If I could tell a story about humans by using animals, that was great. That was in my sweet spot. You know, how seriously do I take knowing how these creatures are built, what their anatomy is? I used to take it less seriously. I'm much more convinced that knowing how they're built allows you to distort them, allows you to exaggerate them. There are a couple of artists I revere who do this incredibly well. A guy named T.S. Sullivan is he was from the 30s. Every Disney artist has these terrible, a stack of photocopies that are like 2 inches thick that were passed on and photocopied copies of copies from animator to animator to animator and so on. And I've got one of those too. Sullivan was everybody's hero. Had huge influence on Fantasia, the way Heinrich Kley did also, another German artist, who, like Sullivan, he caricatured animals. They were clearly cartoons, clearly exaggerated, but also incredibly well informed. You knew exactly what the animal was, and you know exactly how it was built. You believe it. Believability that goes a long way. So I recognize now more than ever how much research pays off. At the same time, if you're constantly looking at the research, it can stop you. It could stop you from really, I mean, at a certain point, I have to turn all those pages down and just see what I retained and then just draw it out of my head. And some of that stuff ends up being the best stuff, the purer stuff, once you kind of let it go. I mean, I know that if I looked at a piece of reference that I used 10 years ago, if I looked at it now with my smarter brain, which knows more stuff, I could use that reference in a much more productive way than I would have when I was younger. You know, you learn stuff. There were a bunch of years there where I didn't have my sketchbook with me, and I started to re-recognize the fact that those long train rides, subway rides or whatever, or sitting in a cafe when you're waiting for somebody, I've solved some pretty good problems, you know, with just thumbnail sketches. Just having it at hand for you to kind of noodle with without the formality of sitting at your desk can be liberating sometimes and really, really useful. And at the same time, I do sneak in some life drawings, you know, people sitting around, people on the train, whatever. The amount of characters in any given subway car in New York is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. The combination of costumes, the silhouettes, the faces, you literally can't make it up. And it's just there's just so much material everywhere you go. So that's back to my comment about observation, that you have to constantly be looking. Constantly. Just looking at you the way you're sitting right now, the way your feet are crossed and you're holding your paper and everything about it, that's stuff to remember, that can really inform that character design moment you're doing. Because, as I say, it's not only just what the character looks like, it's what the character feels like. It's knowing what would the posture be in that situation. You know, is that person nervous or relaxed, and how does a relaxed person look? You know, what happens with the arm? Is it just draped loosely or whatever? And what happens with the spine? So I'm constantly making notes when I'm in my brain, when I'm just walking around, even when I'm just talking to somebody. I'm kind of looking at the way, oh, that's interesting, the way the nostril goes like this, and there's a little bump in the nose there, and we got to remember that. Don't always, but the recorder is always on. There's always that great period in the beginning of making a film, for instance. I love that stage of the process because there are no rules yet. No decisions have been made really about the style. You might have a sense of what the tone is, but anything's possible at that point. So I will do drawings that they haven't asked for, that they might not expect, some that are really broad, some that are, super stylized, but still within my ballpark. But I give them the opportunity to choose something that's maybe a little off center of what I've done before. And sometimes it works, but a lot of times it's kind of back to, but we really like this one, It's not for lack of trying. And it's something I try to challenge myself with as well, with mixed success, to say, all right, I can't do this the same way this time. I've just got to push it in another direction. So that's a constant conversation I have with myself, and I think it's healthy. It's really healthy. I've never been that guy who's frustrated because he doesn't get to go out and do landscape paintings or other more serious stuff for galleries. This is what I do is really what I've always wanted to do. I mean, that's a miracle, really. I mean, it's fantastic that I actually get to enjoy what I do for the most part. But in terms of trying new mediums, I was never a big explorer when I was younger. If I could go back in time, I would have taken, if I went back to school, I would have used that time to really take chances and to try different mediums. I do now. The last couple of years, I've been picking up different things, drawing and painting with different things, just to see what comes out, and that has been healthy. I can't say that any of the results have been dazzling, but it always feels good to do something a little bit different. Yeah, I think it's a really important thing. Let's see. Do I have advice for young people starting out? And I do, I guess, because I give some version of it all the time. And a lot of it is obvious. I mean, you have to draw a lot. You have to constantly be observing. You have to constantly be sketching. And you have to find out who you are. There are people that have their own passions, and the people we love, the people, as I said, whose work we put on our walls, are the ones that are really indulging themselves, and they've found success doing it. They found out who they are. I say to them, you have to draw all the time. You really do have to draw all the time, because you're going to be, if you get a job, you're going to be drawing a lot, and you have to enjoy it. So you've got to figure out what kind of marks you like to make. What kind of drawing do you makes you happy? I tell them it's not so easy. Every now and then I get a young artist who wants to go into editorial, and I tell them that hardly exists anymore. Really, that business, while it was flourishing when I just got into the business in the early 80s, it's all but extinct now. And it's too bad, because it's a wonderful art form. I always enjoyed the problem-solving aspect of it. Every assignment was a different thing that had to be puzzled out, that had to be figured out, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. It engaged my hand and my brain, and it was very it's fulfilling when you get it right, when you solve that problem. Very satisfying. But one of the most important things I tell young artists, they can't look at what's popular now. That's really important. There's so much fantastic work being done. But you've got to look behind you, too. There's an incredible history of art that can be just as inspiring as something done by a hotshot, the greatest hotshots in the business now. And probably those hotshots learned from somebody who's long gone. So there's a wealth of stuff and inspiration to be had, and I think it's really, really important to go back a little bit. And I guess by the same token, I'm old school, but I do believe that while the work that's being done digitally is absolutely dazzling, it's incredible what people are able to do, but a lot of the portfolios, I mean, a great deal of them that I see now, kids coming out of school, they've got unbelievable technical chops, but there's a sameness to it. They haven't found a way to make it their own, and I think that's really, really important. And I think, one of the ways to do that is to balance it with making marks on paper, doing stuff that you can't Command Z yourself out of, You screwed up that line, make it work. It makes you, I think it will help make you more nimble, and your pieces will be perhaps less perfect. And there's something to be said for imperfection. I think there's a lot to be said for that. And for drawing, without a net, you find a way to make it work. These, the detours you go on can be incredibly informative, and it's too easy to fix what you feel like isn't perfect when you're working digitally. Every now and then I'll have an idea for a cover and I'll do a quick thumbnail and that's it, and it's just a matter of kind of teasing it out and fleshing it out. Other times I know this is the idea, it's some version of it, there's all this stuff going on, and I'll just redraw it. And I find that invariably I'm throwing stuff out with each iteration, and that I'm just getting to the basic, this is the idea. And I don't want the reader to get too caught up in everything else so they can't figure out what the story is about. Better way to say that is, I take pains to tell the reader where to look. And it's a little bit of a bait and switch. A lot of times it's, you think you know what you're seeing and look over here. And then there's another beat where you take in the rest of the picture, and that's usually where the punchline lies. So it's a little bit of prestidigitation, if you will. Thank you. And that is, that's something I learned from some great illustrators. There's a guy named Sampe, Jean-Jacques Sampe. I boil things down and I streamline them and get to the essence of what I want you to see. Every now and then I'll do a cover and I realize, oh God, why did I leave that element in there? There's one I did of, it's a fruit market, and it's a market that's right near my place in Brooklyn. And the idea was, it's a fruit market and there's a guy selling apples and he's talking to this woman, and there might even be a little bit of a flirtation going on. And there's the rest of the fruit market. And then you see lower is a gnome selling mushrooms. And he's kind of in between two crates. I don't even know what the joke is exactly. It was funny to me. But the woman had a stroller with a kid in it. And And I realized that's just an element that's just confusing. You don't need it. Didn't need it at all. And as a result, it kind of bifurcates the idea, and you're not quite sure whether that kid is part of the punchline, which it is not. So too much can be too much sometimes. There's an example. That's one of my favorite covers. Just visually, everything. I like the idea. You know, for what it's worth, the first version of that line was he was kind of a little bit wasted away. You know, he'd been a vegetarian for a long time, and he was looking like it. You know, he was looking like some people that take the vegan thing too far. They actually look unhealthy. You know, and that's what I wanted to go with him at first, and I realized it didn't work, and so it actually made more sense for him to be a very kind of healthy-looking lion who's trying this route. And it all works for me really well. His expression, I worked for hours on one of his eyebrows. The height of it and the level of the eyelid changed the story with every different iteration. There's just a kind of a subtle thing I wanted to get to, which was basically, I might be done with this whole vegetarian thing. You know, he's looking at the zebras going by. But I had great reference on this thing, and it's a place nearby, you know, like that other piece that I had done in the beer hall. So it took place in a real place that I recognized, and everybody would recognize. But I put one of those little sandwich board signs out on the sidewalk. That's you know, through the window. It says kale smoothies on it, and it's a prop you would see in that situation, but it wasn't necessary. And I wish I didn't put it in. First of all, I thought kale smoothies was a funny idea. Apparently, there are really kale smoothies, which was shocking to me. I had no idea that people would actually drink a kale smoothie. But that notwithstanding, it kind of interrupted where I wanted you to see the lion first. I wanted you to go back, then outside and see what he's looking at, and then back to the lion again. But it was the lion, the zebras, and then that joke about the kale smoothies, and then back to the lion. Wasn't necessary. I love the idea. I was very happy. You know, to me, that was an idea that I just knew I had to. I knew it was solid. Just a pinch, it was called, and that was one that I just knew was a great idea. Some of the execution I got a little bit caught up in, the goddamn reflection in the window. You know, it's this kind of fancy stuff that it's not really my thing. So, you know, I think it's considered one of the more successful covers. It's become not one of my favorites. The idea, if you see the sketch for it, it's great. It's great. I'm very proud of it. But sometimes things get lost on their way to being finished. Sometimes you can really finish something by finishing it. One of my favorites is called Beach Bum, and that is a guy that's tattooed head to toe. And he's on a nude beach, but where his bathing suit would be, he's totally naked. There are no tattoos. I like the idea a lot. Execution's pretty good. There's some things I would take back if I could, but that one sort of came fully formed. I just did a doodle, and that was exactly right. Also, it has the distinction of being the first full ass you've seen on the New Yorker. That had never happened before, so I take some pride in that accomplishment.